There's a type of reoccurring fighting game character that uses moves from other characters. I did a video on the copycats, or move stealers as I called them, where they have an overall unique moveset that incorporates a move or a few from other characters in the game, whether it's built into their moveset, or they copy moves that they can only use depending on their opponent. However, those characters still had a combination of moves that other characters in the game don't. The other type of copier in fighting games is the mimic, as I call them, where they copy a full moveset verbatim beyond the player's control. These characters have no original moves and turn into other characters in the game right down to their stances. Some even copy the character model or sprite, while others keep their appearance while taking everything else from other characters. I want to go over the most creative of these mimic characters. It's really just a ranking of their character design and potential backstory, since these movesets are completely recycled. Some of these mimics have a formula to who they copy, usually being related to their opponent, while others are completely random. But as long as they copy a full moveset for a match that cannot be chosen in advance, they're eligible for this list. Now, let's scan the top 10 mimic characters in fighting games. Number 10, Luna Lu from Granblue Fantasy Versus. A lot of mimic characters on this list will have originated in games that are over 20 years old, so it's good to start with a more modern game. Though Luna Lu is a mimic character in its most basic form, she's simply the random select button, with the only twist being if you select her for an arcade ladder, she'll give you a new randomly picked character for each battle. However, you will remain that character for each round of the battle, but that's okay. She's doing her job as a mimic character, and still has some unique flair with her screen presence. She'll say an occasional line and still be active in the background, running to catch up where the player is on the screen, along with doing some commanding poses, and her eye lights up. Though my favorite thing she does is if a hot guy is randomly selected, her default pose will have her lusting and drooling, and she'll fall to her knees if he wins. Her lore is that she's an artist who can bring her drawings to life to the extent of her creativity, so in the context of the game, she's drawing random characters on the roster to fight for her, and she's standing in the background running along as the character she's mimicking moves on the stage. And I like her presentation on the character select screen, where half the image is her holding up her sketchpad with the random select symbol drawn on it for a bit of meta humor. Look at her, she's so proud of her pose. As for how the mimicked characters are portrayed, it's the same as if you selected the real character. All interactions in the intros and outros are the same, no vocal distortion, no color changes. I think it would have at least been better if the characters had a custom intro against the mimic character, saying that the character they were fighting seemed off in some way. Or if Luna Lu had her own moveset, it would involve drawing attacks that come to life. But still, I appreciate the sentiment that they had a character to fill the mimic role in the series if they weren't going to make her playable on her own.
Time's up. Shatter the dark. Down.
Next round's mine.
Might take longer than we thought. Player 1, win.
Number 9, Inferno from Soul Calibur. Soul Calibur and its sibling Tekken are developed by Namco, and I've always felt the Namco fighting games are the baseline for mimic characters, since those games are how I was introduced to the concept. For nearly all their mimics, every round, the fighting style randomly changes to another character's moveset and stance, but they keep their appearance. Soul Calibur has the most amount of mimic characters in their series overall, so I tend to think of them as the home for the mimics, and wouldn't you know, their main villain is one. Inferno is the embodiment of the wicked sword Soul Edge, and to show how he can corrupt any weapon, he uses soul-edgified versions of weapons from other characters on the roster, depending on which game you're looking in. The first game, which was actually named Soul Edge, had him use Cervantes' moveset since he took over his body, but then in Soul Calibur 1 and 2, he did the mimic thing. He was a boss and playable in Soul Calibur 1, but only a boss in Soul Calibur 2. Then later games had him go back to Cervantes' moveset or use Nightmare's moveset. Being a guy on fire, it was a cool enough design for me for a final boss on first impression, but I wish he did more as a final boss seeing him over the years. If you wanted to take a page from another final boss, you could have made him like Doral from Virtua Fighter and given him moves from everyone at once, but considering Inferno is a guy on fire, it would have been cooler if he had guy on fire attacks. However, However, all he does are randomized movesets of other characters, changing them between rounds or when he does this fire refresh thing mid-match. I always thought the reasoning behind him being a mimic character is because he's collecting the soul energy of everyone, so he gains their skills, or because every character in Soul Calibur 2 has corrupted soul edge versions of their own weapons, he's the source of that corruption, and he's showing you what your character could become if they succumbed to the soul edge's influence. Either way, I can see how the mimic concept works on a story level. I just wish he had a fully unique moveset on his own. Though the mimicry is still better than when they just give him the moveset of Nightmare or Cervantes and call it a day for an Inferno. And he still has his crazy man spin in the mimic moveset, so I guess he's not a 100% true mimic character, but still, that's mimic enough for me. Number 8, Manenpo from Macaruna Makendo 2. For longtime viewers of this channel, you might remember I like to bring up this fighting game every so often. It's a sequel to a beat-em-up style game, Macaruna Makendo, localized as Kendo Rage in the 90s, with classic 90s butchering of box art when bringing it to North America. They went from anime girls to like realistic comic book style, but they kept the critters anime looking. Anyway, the sequel was a fighting game starring the original protagonist's younger sister who wanted to join the ranks of the Makendo Magical Girls, and then you have a whole bunch of other characters on the roster which are very fun designs. It's pure 90s magical girl anime, and the series even got a one-off OVA, which is a fun half hour of magical girls and guys beating up goons. While the roster starts at 8, there are a few characters to unlock with a secret code on the title screen, one of which is a little catball man named Manenpo. Oh, and while you're putting in the codes, make sure to listen to that sick-ass menu music that will either make you groove or question your sanity. After Manenpo is unlocked, you can play as him in the arcade mode where he copies whoever your opponent is for the fight. While he doesn't have a fun copying animation for his intro, and is only seen transforming in the game's opening movie, there are pre-match interactions between characters where the copied character is surprised and it's a funny little exchange, or at least it sounds funny since they never translated the game and I don't speak Japanese, but the voice actors put their emotion into it. You can tell Manenpo's copy isn't perfect since he still has his own voice in the pre-battle interactions no matter who he's copying, which is the only thing I can interpret in these scenes, but without a translation, I like to think that they detail the story to flesh out the cat. Regardless, I enjoy the characters being surprised at their copies. He may not have much of a unique identity outside of an image in a square, but at least he lets me see everyone's alternate color palette. Number 7, Edgemaster from Soul Calibur. Edgemaster is a mysterious old man who has wisdom of the blade and the weird magic of the world itself. It's right in his name. He's the master of edging. He was only playable in Soul Calibur 1 and 5 though. In Soul Calibur 1, he trained a major character, Keelik, to suppress the evil of the wicked sword Soul Edge, and then he just walked off to do his own mysterious things. He was in later storylines of the games he wasn't on the roster of, but he was always out of sight, out of mind for me, where I didn't really care unless he was playable or in a cutscene. His backstory was just too vague for me to get invested in. I'd much rather see any of the other playable characters do things in the story. And to go with his pretty blank backstory is a mimic moveset. Because he's the master of every fighting style imaginable, he fights using the exact stance of other characters with his own replica of all their weapons. Typical Namco mimic character where he changes styles randomly between each round. But where does he keep all those weapons? What kind of magic pockets does he have? Since he's a very stoic looking character, it's funniest when he gets one of the more manic fighting styles that causes him to contort, like Voldo and his backbends, or if he gets a more timid fighting style like Pyrrha, who has a "don't hit me" pose that he copies. The other factor that takes away from his impact as the master of everything is when he was in Soul Calibur 5, that was a game with 3 mimic characters on the roster, so his gimmick wasn't special. His former student Keelik mimicked all the male characters, and Elysium, who was the embodiment of the titular sword Soul Calibur, copied all the female character movesets, but she did have an exclusive super move to separate her from the rest. And of course, Edgemaster could still copy any character's moveset on the roster, but because of that, it made Edgemaster's presence feel diluted with 3 mimic characters. I think Edgemaster would have worked better in this game if they designed him more like Necrid in Soul Calibur 2, who had a weapon that formed the weapons of a mix of other characters on the roster to create a new moveset with reused moves. I feel showing his mastery would work better if he could switch between styles in the same combo. Then Keelik and Elysium could mimic half the roster each, while Edgemaster does his own thing. It's a shame, since Elder Master characters always have great potential for showing us crazy techniques, but at least half the attacks he copies look extra funny coming from him due to that character model.
So be it then. Now what? KO. Get you gone, and darken the world of man no more.
Number 6, Shadow and Marionette from Darkstalkers. Wow, by the time I finish this entry, I'll have done more entries on these 2 mimic characters across all my videos than I have for QB from the series. Send some of your love QB's way, or love for any of the other Darkstalkers. Anyway, Shadow and Marionette are mimic characters with different methods of picking a random character for each match, but are the same in terms of their basic function in the series. They're both secret characters that need a special code put in on the character select screen, and they copy other characters on the arcade ladder only, no multiplayer. They're in the 3rd Darkstalkers game, Vampire Savior, localized as Darkstalkers 3, and to select them, go to Random Select, hit start 5 times for Shadow or 7 times for Marionette, and then hit any punch or kick to make them appear. Marionette turns into whoever your opponent is on the ladder for the match, and Shadow turns into whoever you just defeated in the prior match for the fight, with his initial character being randomly selected. They get no story, so it's really all aesthetic for them, which is just their intros and outros. Marionette has a cool intro where she's loaded into an unconscious copy of the opponent, and Shadow emerges from the copied opponent in his outro, where the copy freezes during their outro and turns gray, and then he melts over to the opponent to take their body. Since there is no story to them, you just have to assume what their motive is, which I've always speculated for Shadow is he's pulling a Captain Ginyu and just trying to find the strongest body in the universe, which ends with the final boss, the most powerful demon, Jeddah, and for Marionette I have no idea. You do get a special windscreen with both characters, where it's blank with an ellipses, and if you were Shadow, the character you just took over flickers on screen for a few seconds. You also get custom music on that screen for extra mystique. To make up for the lack of arcade ending, winning with these characters gets a special end credit sequence with funky music, and all the characters on the roster that usually fade in and out during the credits are now sepia tone, which I've interpreted as one of these mimic characters have killed them all since they're soulless monsters, and this is in memoriam. However, that's pure speculation. There's also an extra secret factor where either character will just be a question mark on the high score screen if they rank. It's interesting how that leaves a clue for new players arriving at the arcade cabinet. They may have not been big on the story, but they at least give a bit of that 90s arcade mystery. Number 5, 11 from Street Fighter. 11 was introduced in Street Fighter V as a prequel sort of character to 12 from Street Fighter 3. Both are living humanoid creatures made of some white stretchy material that take orders. 11 was built to transform into any fighter in its database, making a pure copy of their moveset, and it just so happens that every character on the Street Fighter V roster was in its database. The scientists involved wanted to mass produce great fighters for Gil and Urian's secret society organization, and with 11 being involved in the background parts of the story, they revealed he was playable in the final season of Street Fighter V's DLC, where he morphs into pure white versions of the characters for a random fight, and has their distorted voices. He's another character who's just a glorified random select button, so they stuck him at the end of the select screen, and why can't I select him? Wasn't he free? Oh, you can only get him if you purchase the character pass for the last DLC season of Street Fighter V, but I got all my characters with the in-game currency and didn't have to buy the pass. I'm not spending $30 for just the Mimic character. What am I gonna do for footage? What am I gonna... Hi everyone, MrTopTenList here. 11 couldn't make it to filming today. He got stuck in traffic at a meeting while getting sick. Instead, I have his brother 12 here to fill in. While 11 came out first chronologically, 12 was created first in 1999 for Street Fighter III Third Strike. He was the scientific creation for Final Boss Gil to be the perfect warrior, stretching his body all over the place and forming sharp objects with his limbs and such. But the real main inspiration from 12 that was used for 11's Mimic moveset was 12's super move X-Copy, which makes a full copy of the opponent's moveset with his body with a very cool startup animation. So 11 was just this aspect of 12's shapeshifting possibilities. So with the story of Street Fighter V occurring earlier in the timeline than Street Fighter III's story, that means 12 technically gained all these powers after being upgraded from 11. So what's gonna happen if we eventually see a 13 come to life? Well, that's the future's problem. Anyway, thanks for filling in for this entry 12.
You win.
Number 4, Chameleon from Mortal Kombat. By the end of Mortal Kombat 3's lifespan, the developers put all of their resources to the limit. The final version of Mortal Kombat 3 was Mortal Kombat Trilogy, which was essentially their Everyone is Here roster at the time. Every character from the game's history was playable based on hardware limitations, so you had the roster of Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, Rain and Noob Saibot from the Sega Genesis port of Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, all the bosses from the first 3 games, a new Johnny Cage was digitized, and for other missing characters, they just ported their Mortal Kombat 2 models in and used what they could fit in with the Mortal Kombat 3 mechanics. However, none of these characters were new, which was fine. There was a lot of content packed in. However, in true Mortal Kombat fashion, there actually was a final new character added in only accessible through secret codes, Chameleon, whose name, appearance, and moveset depends on your version of the game. In the PlayStation version, there was Chameleon with a C, who was a translucent ninja who copied all the male ninjas. He could only be playable by selecting any of the male ninjas and holding down a certain button combination during the difficulty select screen. Then during the first match, your ninja would explode right away and turn into Chameleon. And because Mortal Kombat likes to be different, Chameleon doesn't just change into a random ninja every match or round, he does it continuously through each round. Every few seconds, he will turn the color of another ninja and completely gain their moveset and finishers. He's pretty hard to use, since if you're mid-combo or move input and he turns into someone else, the combo drops and you're just there punching the air for a bit. However, if you keep track of how long he's been one ninja and know how to play all the male ninjas, you can show off a lot. For the N64 version, which had some cut content but ran with faster loading times, 2 characters were hidden on the select screen, so if you put in a code on the startup screen, then you unlock a secret menu in Options which lets you turn on the hidden squares, one of which is Chameleon with a K. It sounds incredibly convoluted, but this is how Mortal Kombat did things until like 2011. This Chameleon uses the palette swap female ninjas and switches between them every few seconds, so same deal as the other Chameleon. Overall, this was the best way to create new characters at the time without using any new resources, so the Chameleons were somewhat popular in the fanbase due to being the final characters of that classic trilogy. They were both brought back in Mortal Kombat Armageddon, which once again had every character from the series at the time, and once again Chameleon with a K was only in the Nintendo version, but now they had a set moveset that took one move each from multiple ninjas to create a Move Stealer style moveset rather than a Mimic character. And it's also worth noting that we got the character Floyd in Mortal Kombat 1, who has male Chameleon's Armageddon moveset, so if that Chameleon ever wants to come back, he'll need to use his original moveset or come up with a new fighting style altogether. That being said, Chameleon with a K seemed to be the more popular one, which I attribute to her big translucent hair now. Look at how cool that looks. And the larger popularity may have led to her role in Mortal Kombat 1, where she's a cameo assist character now, once again taking moves from other characters in a single solidified moveset. So even if Chameleon's classic moveset seems to be retired, their first forms will always have the distinction of being the final secret characters in the original trilogy.
Chameleon wins.
Number 3, Hagure Hitogata from The Last Blade. In my Move Stealer video, I spoke about Akari, a cool magic user and demon summoner in training who provides some much needed levity in this game with a bunch of serious characters all around. One of her tricks was a paper doll man named Hagure, who she lets take over her body and copy her opponent's moves and form for a few seconds before he wears off. However, if you put in a code when selecting Akari in The Last Blade 2, it'll let you play as Hagure from the start without him fading away, indicated by him appearing alongside Akari when she's selected, and you just steal a moveset for the whole fight. As with Marionette, it's just whoever you're playing against on the arcade ladder, so you're going into each fight as a different character. Pretty standard for a mimic, but I like how in the intros and outros, it features Akari locking in and out of Hagure to do the copy. She just emerges from the doll after they win and is like, "Tee-hee, I'm here now." I like this application of the doll, since I always found it to be an underwhelming part of Akari's main moveset. If you got hit immediately after using it, her clone would fade, plus her other skills were just more fun to fight with anyway for me. Making Hagure his own character, so to speak, lets Akari show off one of her abilities without it taking away from her main moveset now, and she looks so happy doing the mimic thing. If it gives Akari more attention, I'm happy for her that she gets a side job as the random button. Number 2, Charade from Soul Calibur. Now this is what comes to mind when I hear mimic character, and that's full nostalgia bias. I generally consider Soul Calibur 2 as my first fighting game that I played consistently when it came out when I was in middle school, and when I learned at the time that Charade is an eyeball man who could have the moveset of any character in the game, I thought it was like the coolest thing ever. Then I learned it's even cooler to have a consistent moveset, but regardless, this was my introduction to the mimic concept. Plus, he has the look I'd expect from a guy who knows every fighting style. He's a pulsating eyeball that forms a body from human remains. He used to be a human who was curious about collecting fragments of the wicked sword Soul Edge, thinking it would be a fun adventure based on legend. When some bandits robbed and killed him, the Soul Edge shards he was clinging to fused with his blood, creating a new creature known as Charade, and the rest of his body was repurposed for Charade. Now it wanders the world looking for the rest of Soul Edge, and it has the ability to scan the minds of anyone it fights, so that's how he learned every single weapon style in the game. See, that eye is for more than just throbbing. How does he form the weapons though? I'm assuming it's Soul Edge related, but the sheer inhumanity of him makes it where I don't need an explanation. It just feels natural that he'd mimic. They brought him back as an NPC in a couple of games, but nothing quite feels the same as Soul Calibur 2 Charade. My favorite thing about him though is actually from a personal memory later on. When my friends and I rediscovered Soul Calibur 2 in college for game nights, we had a self-made party roulette mode, where we would all go head to head with Charade only, and we would only pick the ice stage for maximum chaos. On this stage, your characters have less traction, so not only are your movesets completely randomized because of Charade, but it's harder to control your motion, and characters slide around more with an increased threat of ringing out. One of us dubbed this as the Ice Charades, either in reference to the Ice Capades, an old skating event, or the Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends event parodying the Ice Capades. Either way, this goofy little random mode my friends and I made up is why I'll always have a soft spot for the scary eyeball man.
You win.
The honorable mentions have a theme, Combat from Tekken. He was only a mimic character in Tekken 4, which I don't own, so I just decided to leave him off. He's the standard Namco mimic, being a learning robot, and when he was brought back in Tekken Tag Tournament 2, he was now an amalgamation of moves from other characters, leaving his mimic days behind him. Unknown from Tekken Tag Tournament. I didn't have her unlocked in my version, so I left her off too. When she was brought back in Tekken Tag Tournament 2, she was now just an alternate Jun Kazama moveset with some extra gooey stuff in her attacks. And Ulkadan from Soul Calibur 3. Once again, I didn't have a copy of Soul Calibur 3, so I left him off too. He's a cool Owlman though, so he has that over Edgemaster and Inferno for me. As you can see, narrowing it down to 10 was unintentionally easy this time. Sorry for fans of these characters. Anyway, I have another entry to do. For number 1, it had to be the fighting game character that's most associated with being a mimic. The mimic character who has been in the most amount of games, with the perfect mix of silly and serious. Number 1, Mokujin from Tekken. Mokujin is a training dummy made from a 2,000-year-old white oak, but that tree must have been enchanted, since anytime there is an evil energy in the air, it brings the dummy to life and it pursues that evil, which can be applied to any time there's a final boss in the series that coincides with a Mokujin appearance on the roster. Considering he's a legendary fighting dummy, he's likely seen hundreds of martial arts styles, explaining how he can do a perfect replica of every fighting style in the game. As with the other Namco mimics, he changes fighting styles each round. Similar to Edgemaster, the more stoic fighters look organic on Mokujin, but when this Woodman gets a more flashy fighting style, whether it's from a wrestler or just a manic character, the goofier nature of him comes out. He can be vicious all he wants, but it's hard to be scared of his Pinocchio head and those gentle red eyes. So that's where his serious nature ends. Him being a fighting dummy gives him a logical reason to fit into the universe, but once you get into his other traits, you'll see he's a bit wacky. First off, if he gets the moveset of a character with something else on their body, like wings or a sword, he forms his own, and I always felt like there was a silly factor to that. Then when we see him between rounds, he's T-posing and spinning like he's loading his data. Finally, his story gets comedic, especially in his later appearances. It was always lighthearted in nature, but by the time we got to Tekken 6, they reached my favorite level of wacky. They're either lampoons on serious endings, or my favorite, when Mokujin goes for a tour at the Namco office and meets a tour guide secretary woman who's a lady Mokujin, and it has this limited animation, and they meet Pac-Man, and the whole thing is great. It feels like something from an Adult Swim bumper, or Super Milk-chan. And yes, Lady Mokujin is an alternate costume for Mokujin. They even have official art of him carving her. Mokujin also has counterparts that get put in spin-off games on occasion, Tetsujin and Kinjin. They look cool, especially the king, but they mainly exist to give us extra Mokujin for a special mode or story reasons, so they're nothing special to me. Despite being a mimic character, in his later Tekken appearances, his movesets had a few unique properties. Because his size wasn't adjusted for the copied movesets, his limbs worked differently depending on the original character sizes. For shorter characters, he might have been able to juggle more or combo off things the originals couldn't combo off of, since he had more reach on some of his attacks. But likewise, for taller characters, he couldn't reach as far as the originals, so attacks that could naturally chain together don't work for Mokujin. Not sure if this was intended, but it gave him an extra wildcard factor. Ever since Tekken Tag Tournament 2 in 2012 though, Mokujin hasn't been around on rosters. Tekken 7 and 8 excluded him, and I'm not sure why. He's just a mimic character. I feel not as much needs to be balanced with him, so why not just add him in as a goofy little extra? And if you're afraid of him being unbalanced, just make it where he can't be played in ranked matches and tournaments and stuff like that. I feel a part of Tekken's identity is missing without him as our living random button. He's an icon of the series, appearing in Tekken 3, 5, 6, and both tag tournament games. He was pretty much a staple once he started appearing in consecutive games, and while he gets a visual reference every so often in games he's not in, I don't want a future of Tekken generations to forget why we love seeing the Tree Man in Tekken products. So, for being a goofy guy with a pretty cool origin and copying movesets more often than the rest, Mokujin copies his way to number 1.
Perfect. Mokujin wins.
Now, what did you think? Were all these mimics iconic despite doing exactly what their opponents do, or should some of them have just been a random button without a body? And who are some of your favorite fighting game mimics, whether I discussed them or not? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next video.